The sun cast long shadows across Silveridge, Colorado, as Sarah Zimmer collapsed against the weathered church wall, her stomach cramping with hunger that had become her constant companion. It was 1876, and the West had not been kind to a woman traveling alone. She closed her eyes against the sting of dust and tears, clutching the small leather-bound journal that contained the last fragments of her former life. Sarah hadn't eaten in 3 days. Her funds had dwindled to nothing after the stagecoach robbery that had left her stranded in this mining town with nothing but the clothes on her back, and her mother's wedding ring hidden in the hem of her dress. At 22, she had imagined a different life for herself when she'd left Philadelphia, certainly not sleeping in the dirt beside a church, hoping for a miracle. The sound of wagon wheels crunching on the gravel road barely registered in her consciousness. Sarah had stopped expecting help after the first night when the local boarding house owner had made it clear what kind of work she'd need to do for a bed. She'd refused, choosing hunger over degradation. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep, touched with a slight drawl that wasn't native to Colorado. Sarah forced her eyes open, squinting against the late afternoon light at the silhouette of a man standing before her. He was tall, dressed in the practical attire of a cattleman dust-covered denim, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her cracked lips and hollow cheeks told a different story. The man crouched down, and Sarah could see his face clearly now, sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw covered with a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His expression was one of genuine concern rather than the predatory interest she'd grown accustomed to. "You don't look fine," he said simply, offering her a canteen. "When's the last time you ate something?" Sarah's pride warred with her desperation as she accepted the water, taking small sips as she'd learned to do when dehydrated. "It doesn't matter," she managed. The man studied her for a long moment, then stood and walked to his wagon without another word. Sarah's heart sank, thinking he'd drive away like all the others. Instead, he returned with a piece of jerky and a biscuit wrapped in a clean handkerchief. "Eat slowly," he advised as he handed her the food. Sarah's fingers trembled as she took the modest offering. "Thank you, Mr. Quentin Irwin," he replied, removing his hat. "I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here." Sarah took a careful bite of the biscuit, savoring the simple sustenance. "Sarah Zimmer," she offered in return. Quentin nodded, his gaze sweeping over her thin frame and worn dress. "Miss Zimmer, I don't mean to pry, but there's not much future in sleeping beside a church wall. Whatever brought you here, there must be somewhere better you could go." "I have nowhere," she admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "I was traveling to Denver to take a teaching position, but bandits took everything. The school won't hold the post without confirmation, and I can't even afford the telegram to send it." Quentin considered this information, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he bent down and gently lifted Sarah to her feet. Before she could protest, he'd scooped her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she gasped, stiffening in his hold. "No more," he said firmly, carrying her toward his wagon. "No more sleeping in the dirt, no more hunger. I need help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to get married. The position includes room and board, and I'll pay you fair wages." Sarah should have been suspicious, should have questioned his motives, but the genuine determination in his eyes silenced her doubts. This wasn't charity, it was an offer of honest work. "I don't know the first thing about housekeeping," she confessed as he set her carefully on the wagon seat. Quentin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Can you cook anything that's not burnt to a crisp?" "Yes." "Can you read and write?" "I was to be a teacher, Mr. Irwin." "Then you're already more qualified than most. The rest you can learn." He climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. "Rest if you can. It's a long ride to Willow Creek Ranch." As the wagon pulled away from Silveridge, Sarah clutched her journal and stole glances at the man beside her. She didn't know if she could trust Quentin Irwin, but for the first time in weeks, hope flickered in her chest, fragile but present. The journey to Willow Creek Ranch revealed more about Quentin than he'd offered in words. He drove with quiet confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the area. He wasn't overly talkative, but neither was he cold. When they stopped to rest the horses at a small stream, he helped Sarah down from the wagon with gentle hands, ensuring she was steady on her feet before releasing her. "There's food in that sack," he said, nodding toward a canvas bag. "Nothing fancy, but it'll keep your strength up." Sarah found bread, cheese, and apples, simple fare that seemed like a feast after days of hunger. She ate slowly, watching as Quentin tended to his team of horses with practiced ease. "You mentioned teaching," he said after a while, his back still turned as he checked the harness. "What subjects?" "Literature, history, mathematics for younger students," Sarah replied, surprised by his interest. "My father was a professor at a women's college in Philadelphia. He believed daughters deserved education as much as sons." Quentin nodded. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Sarah said softly. "Both my parents died last winter influenza. I had to sell our home to pay the debts. The teaching position was my chance to start over." Quentin finally turned to face her, his expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. Starting over isn't easy, but it can be done. My father died when I was 16. Mother followed 3 years later. I've been on my own since then, building the ranch from almost nothing." The shared confidences created a tentative bridge between them, and when they resumed their journey, the silence felt companionable rather than awkward. As dusk settled over the land, Quentin pointed toward a distant ridge. "Willow Creek Ranch lies just beyond that rise. We'll be home before full dark." Home. The word stirred something in Sarah's chest, longing, perhaps, or trepidation. She'd had a home once, filled with books and laughter and parents who'd loved her. Now she was traveling toward a stranger's property, placing her trust in a man she'd known for mere hours. When they crested the ridge, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The ranch spread before them, not an imposing estate, but a welcoming homestead nestled in a valley where a creek wound through stands of cottonwoods and willows. A sturdy 2-story house stood as the property's centerpiece, flanked by a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Lamplight glowed in the windows and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "Someone's there," Sarah observed, tension creeping into her voice. "Miguel Ortega, my foreman," Quentin explained. "He lives in a cabin behind the barn but keeps the main house fire going when I'm away. He's been with me since the beginning. You can trust him." As they approached, a stocky man with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the barn. He raised a hand in greeting, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he recognized Quentin. "Thought you'd be another day at least," Miguel called as they pulled up to the house. "Change of plans," Quentin replied, jumping down from the wagon. He circled around to help Sarah, his hands steadying her as her legs wobbled from the long journey. "Miguel, this is Miss Sarah Zimmer. She'll be taking over the housekeeping duties." Miguel's dark eyes assessed Sarah with frank curiosity, but his nod was respectful. "Pleasure, Miss Zimmer. House has been too quiet since Mrs. Hodges left." "Thank you, Mr. Ortega," Sarah managed, feeling self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. "Miguel, could you see to the horses?" Quentin asked. "I'll show Miss Zimmer to her quarters." Miguel tipped his hat and took the reins, leading the team toward the barn. Quentin guided Sarah toward the house, his hand hovering near her elbow but not quite touching her. The interior of the ranch house surprised Sarah. She'd expected a bachelor's Spartan accommodations, but the front room was comfortably furnished with a large stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and shelves lined with books. A few quality pieces suggested that Quentin had invested in comfort rather than ostentation. "The kitchen's through there," he said, pointing to a doorway. "Pantry's well stocked, dining rooms across the hall. Upstairs are 4 bedrooms, mine's at the end of the hall. Yours will be the one with the east-facing window. The back staircase leads from the kitchen to the upstairs hallway." Sarah listened attentively, trying to memorize the layout despite her exhaustion. "It's a lovely home," she offered sincerely. Quentin's expression softened momentarily. "It was just a house until recently. Been adding to it over the years, making it more than just a place to sleep between work days." He gestured toward the stairs. Let me show you your room. You need rest more than a tour right now. The bedroom was simply furnished but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed, a dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small writing desk beneath the window. A braided rug in blues and greens softened the wooden floor. The previous housekeeper left some clothing that might suit you until you can get your own, Quentin said, opening the dresser drawer to reveal several neatly folded garments. Mrs. Hodges was a bit broader, but not much taller than you. The thoughtfulness of this gesture, having prepared the room before even bringing her inside, wasn't lost on Sarah. Mr. Irwin, she began, but found herself at a loss for words. We'll discuss duties and such tomorrow, he said, saving her from fumbling for a response. There's water in the pitcher and towels in the cabinet. If you need anything else, my room is down the hall. He moved toward the door, then paused. I meant what I said earlier, Miss Zimmer. No more hardship if I can help it. You're safe here. After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, tears welling in her eyes not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of having walls around her, a roof overhead, and the promise of regular meals. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how long this arrangement would last, but for tonight she had shelter. She used the water to wash away the dust of travel, changed into a borrowed nightgown that hung loose on her underfed frame and slipped between clean sheets. As sleep claimed her, Sarah wondered about the quiet cowboy who'd lifted her from the church steps and brought her to this sanctuary. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the east-facing window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, Sarah was disoriented, the comfortable bed and clean room unfamiliar after weeks of increasingly desperate accommodations. Then memory returned: the church wall, Quentin Irwin's unexpected kindness, the journey to Willow Creek Ranch. Sarah rose, feeling stronger after a night of untroubled sleep. She dressed in one of Mrs. Hodges' cast-off dresses, a serviceable brown calico that hung loose around her waist but could be cinched with a belt. After washing her face and attempting to bring order to her thick chestnut hair, she took a deep breath and ventured downstairs. The smell of coffee and bacon guided her to the kitchen, where she found Quentin at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He looked different in the morning light, less intimidating without his hat, his sandy hair showing hints of gold where the sun touched it. He'd already been working. His sleeves were rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and his expression was one of concentration rather than the wariness of yesterday. "Good morning," Sarah said, hovering in the doorway. Quentin turned, surprise flashing across his face before he nodded in greeting. "Morning, didn't expect you up so early after yesterday's journey." "I've imposed enough without expecting breakfast in bed," she replied, moving further into the kitchen. "Though I admit I'm surprised to find you cooking." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Been fending for myself since Mrs. Hodges left. Miguel's cooking would starve a coyote." He gestured to a pot on the stove. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Sarah found cups in a nearby cupboard and poured coffee for them both. The domestic activity felt strange yet comforting, a reminder of mornings in Philadelphia when she'd helped her mother prepare breakfast before her father descended from his study. "I can take over the cooking starting today," she offered, setting his cup on the table. "If you'll show me where everything is kept." Quentin nodded, transferring the bacon to a plate lined with a cloth. "Appreciate that. I manage the basics, but not much beyond." He cracked eggs into the skillet, the whites sizzling in the bacon fat. "After breakfast, I'll show you around, explain what needs doing." They ate at the kitchen table rather than in the formal dining room. Fried eggs, bacon, and biscuits that Quentin admitted were left by Miguel's wife, Elena, who occasionally helped with cooking. The meal was simple but satisfying, and Sarah found herself relaxing as Quentin explained the ranch's daily rhythms. "We're not a big operation compared to some," he said. "About 2,000 acres, mostly running cattle, though we keep horses too. 8 ranch hands including Miguel. They all have quarters in the bunkhouse except Miguel and Elena, who have the cabin behind the barn." "And what would my duties entail exactly?" Sarah asked, wanting clarity on her position. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, Quentin listed. Managing the household accounts if you're comfortable with figures. The men take their midday meals in the bunkhouse. Alina handles that, but breakfast and supper are served here for me and any guests. During roundup or branding, you'd be cooking for more, but that's not for a few months yet. The responsibilities seemed reasonable, especially for someone accustomed to running a professor's household. And my compensation, Quentin named a figure that was modest but fair, adding, plus room and board, of course. 1 day off a week, usually Sunday unless we're in the middle of something urgent. If that sounds agreeable, we can consider it settled. It does, Sarah said, relief washing through her. The position wouldn't make her wealthy, but it would allow her to save, to eventually rebuild what she'd lost. Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Quentin, he corrected. No need for formality when it's just us around the table. Quentin, she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. And you should call me Sarah. He nodded, a flicker of something like satisfaction crossing his features. Well then, Sarah, if you're finished, I'll show you the rest of the place. The tour revealed a well-run ranch with clear attention to detail. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with a formal parlor that Quentin admitted was rarely used, a study lined with more books than Sarah would have expected, and a cellar stocked with preserves and root vegetables. Outside, the property stretched in all directions, grazing lands, a kitchen garden that had seen better days, an orchard of apple and pear trees, and the creek that gave the ranch its name. The gardens suffered without regular tending, Quentin acknowledged as they walked the overgrown paths. Mrs. Hodges kept it up, but none of us have had time. I could restore it, Sarah offered, already envisioning the potential. My mother maintained a garden in Philadelphia. The growing season's different here, but the principles should be similar. I'd welcome that, Quentin said, his gaze sweeping over the neglected plots. Fresh vegetables would be a welcome change from what we've been making do with. As they circled back toward the house, Sarah spotted a small, fenced plot beneath a cottonwood tree. 2 wooden crosses stood sentinel over what was clearly a family gravesite. Quentin followed her gaze. My parents, he said quietly. Father died from a fall his horse spooked during a thunderstorm, mother from pneumonia 3 winters later. This land was important to them. Important enough that father is buried here instead of the churchyard in town. The personal revelation surprised Sarah. Quentin hadn't struck her as a man who shared his past easily. You've honored them by building this place, she said softly. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I've tried, never sure if it's enough. Before she could respond, he gestured toward the house. You should rest today, get your bearings. Tomorrow's soon enough to take on full duties. I'd rather start now, Sarah countered. Idleness has never suited me, and I've imposed on your hospitality enough. A hint of a smile touched Quentin's lips. Stubborn, aren't you? Determined, she corrected, returning his almost smile with one of her own. Fair enough. Kitchen's yours whenever you're ready. I'll be checking the north pasture with Miguel if you need anything. Should be back by supper time. As Quentin strode toward the barn, Sarah watched him go, struck by the enigma of the man. Gruff yet kind, reserved yet unexpectedly thoughtful. She wasn't sure what to make of him, but she was certain of one thing: Quentin Irwin had saved her from a desperate situation, asking nothing in return except honest work. For that alone, he deserved her best efforts. With renewed purpose, Sarah turned toward the house. She had a kitchen to organize, a meal to plan, and a new life to begin. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at Willow Creek Ranch. Sarah rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Quentin and any ranch hands eating at the main house. Mornings were spent cleaning, afternoons dedicated to laundry or baking, and in between, she carved out time to resurrect the kitchen garden. Evenings brought the satisfaction of serving a well-prepared supper, followed by quiet hours where she either retired to her room with a book borrowed from Quentin's surprisingly extensive library, or sat in the kitchen mending while he worked on accounts in his study. They rarely spent evenings together, but their morning and evening meals provided opportunities for conversation that gradually revealed more about each other. Sarah learned that Quentin had attended 2 years of university in Denver before his mother's death called him home to the ranch. He subscribed to several newspapers and journals that arrived with the monthly supply wagon, and he had definite opinions about territorial politics, though he shared them sparingly. In turn, Sarah told him about growing up in a household where education was valued above material wealth, about her father's work at the college, and her mother's involvement in the women's suffrage movement. She spoke of Philadelphia's museums and theaters, carefully avoiding any implication that she found her current surroundings lacking by comparison. "You must miss city life," Quentin observed one evening as they lingered over coffee after supper. Sarah considered this. "I miss certain aspects of the libraries primarily, but there's something honest about life here. The city conceals much beneath its polished surface." Quentin studied her with those penetrating blue eyes that sometimes seemed to see more than she intended to reveal. "Most people find the isolation difficult. Perhaps I'm not most people," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, it's hardly isolation with ranch hands coming and going and Alina visiting most afternoons." This was true. Alina Ortega had become a welcome friend, stopping by regularly with advice about local plants and cooking techniques adapted to the high-altitude climate. The older woman's warmth and practical wisdom helped ease Sarah's transition to ranch life. "Speaking of visitors," Quentin said, setting down his cup, "we'll be having guests next week. The Tuckers from the neighboring ranch to the east and Harold Jenkins, who owns the mercantile in town, quarterly business meeting that usually includes supper afterward." Sarah nodded, mentally cataloging what she'd need for a more formal meal. "How many in total?" "5, including us. Franklin Tucker and his son Wesley, Jenkins, Miguel, and myself. Nothing fancy required. These are practical men, but perhaps something beyond our usual fare." "I'll plan accordingly," Sarah assured him. "Alina mentioned a recipe for apple cake that might make a suitable dessert." Quentin's expression softened slightly. "My mother used to make apple cake for special occasions. Haven't had it in years." The wistful note in his voice tugged at something in Sarah's chest. "Then I'll be sure to include it." The night of the business dinner arrived with Sarah feeling unaccountably nervous. She'd spent the day preparing roasting a beef joint, baking the promised apple cake, and preparing vegetables from her now flourishing garden. She'd even cut fresh flowers for the dining room table, an extravagance that earned an approving nod from Quentin when he came in from his day's work. "You've gone to considerable trouble," he observed as she arranged the blooms in a seldom-used crystal vase. "First impressions matter," Sarah replied, straightening the tablecloth. "These men are your business associates. I wouldn't want to reflect poorly on you." Something flickered in Quentin's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "You could never reflect poorly on anything, Sarah," he said quietly, then cleared his throat. "I should clean up before they arrive." He disappeared upstairs, leaving Sarah to wonder at the unexpected compliment and the warmth it kindled in her chest. The Tuckers arrived first. Franklin, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice and hearty laugh, and Wesley, his son of about 30 who shared his father's robust build but little of his animated demeanor. They were followed shortly by Harold Jenkins, a thin, fastidious man who immediately complimented Sarah on the civilizing influence she'd clearly had on Willow Creek Ranch. "Quentin's place always had potential," Jenkins remarked as he accepted a glass of whiskey in the parlor, "but it needed a woman's touch to truly shine. Mrs. Hodges did her best, of course, but she lacked your evident refinement, Miss Zimmer." Sarah smiled politely, though she found the dismissal of Mrs. Hodges distasteful. "I've merely built upon foundations already well established," she replied. "Mr. Irwin maintains high standards in all aspects of his ranch." Quentin, who had been discussing cattle prices with Franklin Tucker, glanced over at her words. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah thought she detected gratitude in his gaze. The business discussion over dinner was lively but civil, with occasional pauses where the men complimented the food. Sarah served the courses efficiently, maintaining a professional demeanor while absorbing the information being exchanged. Cattle markets, water rights, railroad expansion, these matters affected her future as much as the men's, and she found herself genuinely interested. "Miss Zimmer," Franklin Tucker addressed her as she served the apple cake, "Quentin tells us you were bound for a teaching position before circumstances brought you here. A fortunate turn of events for him, clearly, but do you miss the opportunity to practice your intended profession?" Sarah placed the cake before him, considering her response. "Education remains a passion, Mr. Tucker, but I've found satisfaction in my current position. One can learn and teach in many environments." "Well said," Tucker approved, turning to Quentin. "You found yourself a remarkable housekeeper, Irwin, pretty as a picture and educated too. If I were 20 years younger and not happily married, I'd be giving you competition." Wesley Tucker, who had been quiet for most of the meal, suddenly showed interest. "Father's right about your looks, Miss Zimmer, though he's spoken for and I'm not. Perhaps you'd allow me to call on you sometime?" Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected attention. Before she could formulate a response, Quentin intervened. "Miss Zimmer's duties keep her quite occupied, Tucker," he said, his tone deceptively casual, though Sarah detected an underlying tension. "And I believe we were discussing the possibility of sharing costs on fence repairs along our shared boundary." The abrupt change of subject was noticed by all, but Wesley Tucker merely raised an eyebrow before allowing the conversation to shift back to business matters. As Sarah retreated to the kitchen to prepare coffee, she found herself unsettled by the exchange. Quentin had no claim on her personal time, yet he'd effectively deflected Wesley's interest without consulting her wishes. When she returned with the coffee service, the conversation had moved to local politics. Sarah served each man silently, her composed expression revealing nothing of her inner thoughts. Only when she placed Quentin's cup before him did she meet his gaze directly, a questioning look that he acknowledged with the slightest inclination of his head. Later, after the guests had departed with compliments to both host and cook, Sarah began clearing the dining room while Quentin closed up the house for the night. They worked in silence until the dishes were stacked in the kitchen, ready for washing in the morning. "You were right about the apple cake," Quentin said finally, leaning against the doorframe. "It was just like my mother's." "I'm glad," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on her apron. She hesitated, then added, "May I speak frankly?" Quentin straightened, his expression wary but receptive. "Always." "You had no right to answer for me when Mr. Tucker asked to call. Whatever my duties here, my personal time remains my own to allocate." Quentin's jaw tightened momentarily before he nodded. "You're right, I overstepped." The ready admission surprised her. "Then why did you do it?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort from a man usually so controlled. "Wesley Tucker has a reputation with women that doesn't speak well of his character. I've seen how he treats the saloon girls in town, how quickly he loses interest in anything he easily acquires." He met her eyes directly. "I wouldn't see you hurt by someone like that." Sarah absorbed this explanation, torn between appreciation for his protective instinct and frustration at its presumption. "I'm not without judgment, Quentin. I've encountered men of questionable character before." "I know that," he acknowledged. "It wasn't a reflection on your discernment, it was." He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "It was what?" Sarah prompted. "A selfish reaction," he admitted quietly. "The thought of you spending time with Tucker didn't sit well with me, and I spoke without thinking." The implication behind his words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she recognized what Quentin himself might not yet have fully acknowledged, that his concern stemmed from feelings beyond those of an employer for a valued employee. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally, her voice softer than before. "And your concern, even if its expression was somewhat high-handed." A hint of a smile touched Quentin's lips. "I'll endeavor to be less high-handed in the future." "See that you do," Sarah replied, her own smile emerging despite her efforts to maintain severity. "Good night, Quentin." "Good night, Sarah," he returned, watching as she gathered her lamp and moved toward the back stairs. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah found herself replaying their conversation, analyzing the subtle shift it represented in their relationship. For the first time, Quentin had revealed something beyond simple appreciation for her work, a personal interest he tried to disguise as protective concern. The revelation was both thrilling and unsettling. She'd come to Willow Creek Ranch seeking safety and stability, not the complicated emotions now stirring in her heart. Yet as she extinguished her lamp and settled beneath the quilt, Sarah couldn't deny that something had changed. The question was whether to encourage that change or guard against it. Summer gave way to autumn, painting the landscape around Willow Creek Ranch in gold and crimson. The garden yielded its final harvest, providing vegetables for Sarah to preserve for the winter months ahead. The cattle were brought down from the high summer pastures, and the ranch hands worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the colder weather. Sarah's relationship with Quentin had settled into a comfortable routine after the night of the dinner party. Neither mentioned his protective impulse toward her again, yet something had undeniably shifted between them. Quentin sought her company more frequently, sometimes lingering in the kitchen while she worked or inviting her to join him in the study on evening when accounting books weren't demanding his attention. These quiet evenings became Sarah's favorite times. They would read separately, occasionally sharing passages that struck them as particularly meaningful or amusing. Sometimes they played chess, where Sarah discovered Quentin to be a worthy opponent who neither condescended to her abilities nor allowed her to win. Most precious were the conversations that flowed more freely in these private hours, discussions about books, territorial politics, memories of their respective childhoods. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Sarah asked one evening as rain drummed against the study windows. Quentin looked up from the book he'd been reading, considering the question. "Not always. I had notions of becoming a lawyer when I was younger, even started studying in that direction during my time in Denver." "What changed your mind?" "It wasn't a change of mind so much as a recognition of responsibility," he replied. "This land has been in my family since my grandfather's time. When my mother fell ill, there was no question of staying away. After she passed, I could have sold up, returned to my studies, but—" He gestured vaguely toward the window where darkness obscured the ranch beyond. "This place gets in your blood, becomes part of who you are," Sarah nodded, understanding the sentiment even as she recognized the sacrifice it represented. "Do you regret it, the path not taken?" Quentin considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been, but regret, no, there's satisfaction in building something tangible, in working land that responds to good stewardship." His gaze settled on her face. "What about you? Do you regret the teaching position you lost?" It was Sarah's turn to reflect. "I thought I would. Teaching was the future I'd planned, the way I'd support myself after my parents died, but circumstances forced me onto a different path, and now—" She smiled softly. "I've found unexpected contentment here." Something warmed in Quentin's expression. "I'm glad to hear that. Though I do miss having pupils," Sarah admitted. "There's a special joy in watching someone grasp a new concept, in helping knowledge take root." Quentin was silent for a moment, then said, "There are children at some of the neighboring ranches who receive little formal education. Distances are too great for regular schooling in town. Perhaps there's a way to combine your current duties with some teaching." Sarah straightened in her chair, the possibility immediately appealing. "Do you think their parents would be interested?" "It's worth asking. Several of the ranchers have mentioned concerns about their children falling behind." Quentin marked his place in his book and set it aside. "I could speak with the Bennetts and the Crawfords when I see them at the livestock auction next week. They each have school-age children, and their properties are close enough that the children could ride over a few times a week." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched Sarah deeply. Here was evidence that Quentin saw her as more than a housekeeper. He recognized her skills, her passions, and sought ways to help her fulfill them. "I'd be very grateful if you would," she said, her voice soft with emotion. Quentin's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Your happiness matters to me, Sarah," he said simply. Then, as if concerned he'd revealed too much, he cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. I should check the barn before turning in." After he left, Sarah remained in the study, her book forgotten in her lap as she contemplated the implications of his words. "Your happiness matters to me." Such a straightforward statement, yet laden with meaning that neither of them seemed quite ready to acknowledge openly. True to his word, Quentin spoke with the neighboring ranchers, and within a fortnight, Sarah found herself preparing the rarely used parlor as a makeshift classroom for 6 children ranging in age from 7 to 14. The Bennetts had 3 children, John, Mary, and little Thomas, while the Crawfords contributed Abigail, Ruth, and William to the impromptu school. Sarah discovered that teaching these eager, if sometimes unruly, ranch children brought a dimension of fulfillment she'd been missing. 3 mornings a week, she guided them through reading, arithmetic, history, and natural sciences, adapting her lessons to accommodate their varying ages and abilities. The arrangement required careful planning to ensure her household duties weren't neglected, but the joy she derived from teaching made the extra effort worthwhile. Quentin observed her classes occasionally, standing quietly in the doorway with an expression of quiet approval that warmed Sarah more than effusive praise might have. He'd ordered books and slates from Denver, and had even repurposed an old table as a desk for her to use during lessons. One crisp October morning, Sarah was explaining the water cycle to her students when she noticed Quentin lingering longer than usual. The children were engaged in drawing diagrams of clouds, precipitation, and evaporation when he finally approached her desk. "Mrs. Crawford mentioned that Ruth has shown remarkable improvement in her reading," he said quietly. "She's quite impressed with your teaching." Sarah smiled, pleasure coursing through her at the compliment. "Ruth is a dedicated student. She simply needed encouragement and consistent instruction." Quentin nodded, his gaze sweeping over the industrious children before returning to Sarah. "You've given them that and more. You're a natural teacher, Sarah." "Thank you," she replied, warmed by his praise. "It means a great deal to have your support in this endeavor." Something flickered in Quentin's eyes, an emotion Sarah couldn't quite identify. "I'll leave you to your lesson," he said after a moment, "but perhaps you join me for a ride this afternoon. There's something I'd like to show you, and the weather may not hold much longer for such outings." The invitation surprised her. Though they'd spent increasing time in each other's company around the house, they'd never ventured out together except for practical errands to town. "I'd like that," Sarah answered, curiosity piqued, "after the children leave." "I'll saddle the horses at 2, Quentin confirmed before nodding a farewell to the class and departing. The remainder of the morning passed in a haze of anticipation for Sarah. After the children left, and she'd prepared a cold supper that wouldn't require her presence in the late afternoon, she changed into her riding outfit, a divided skirt that Alina had helped her sew, after Sarah discovered the impracticality of conventional dresses on horseback. Quentin was waiting at the stables, 2 horses already saddled. He'd chosen the gentlest mare in his remuda for Sarah, a dapple gray named Willow who responded well to an inexperienced rider. His own mount was Dakota, the chestnut gelding he favored for everyday riding. "Ready?" he asked as he helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Sarah nodded, settling into the saddle with growing confidence after months of practice. "Where are we going?" "There's a place on the western edge of the property I think you'll appreciate," Quentin replied, swinging onto Dakota with practiced ease. "It's about an hour's ride." They set off at a leisurely pace, following a well-worn trail that wound through pastureland before ascending gradually into more rugged terrain. The afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, setting the autumn foliage ablaze with color. As they rode, Quentin pointed out features of the land, a natural spring that never ran dry even in drought years, a stand of aspen trees that marked the boundary of his property, a rocky outcropping where mountain lions sometimes sun themselves in winter. "You know every inch of this land," Sarah observed as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. Quentin dismounted to let Dakota drink, offering a hand to help Sarah down as well. I should hope so. Been working it since I was old enough to sit a horse without falling off. It shows, Sarah said, stretching her legs. The way you talk about it not just as property, but as something alive, something with character. Quentin gave her one of his rare full smiles, the kind that transformed his normally serious face and crinkled the corners of his eyes. That's exactly it. Land has personality just like people, some parts stubborn, some generous, some unpredictable. They remounted after the brief rest, continuing their journey as the terrain grew more challenging. Finally, Quentin led them through a narrow pass between two rocky hills, emerging onto a high meadow that stole Sarah's breath. The vista before them was spectacular. The valley spread out below, Willow Creek winding like a silver ribbon through golden grasslands and copper-colored stands of cottonwoods. Beyond, the mountains rose in purple majesty against the clear blue sky, their highest peaks already dusted with early snow. "Oh," Sarah breathed, reining Willow to a halt. "It's beautiful." Quentin stopped beside her, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Thought you might appreciate it." "This is my thinking spot where I come when decisions need making or when the house feels too confining." "I can see why," Sarah murmured, drinking in the panorama. "One could gain perspective on almost anything from up here." They dismounted, and Quentin spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag beneath the lone pine tree that stood sentinel at the meadow's edge. From another bag, he produced a small picnic bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of preserves that Sarah recognized as her own handiwork. "You planned this," she observed, settling on the blanket. "Guilty," Quentin admitted, sitting beside her. "Thought you might enjoy a few hours away from the house. You've scarcely had a day off since you arrived." "I haven't needed one," Sarah replied honestly. "The work doesn't feel like burden." Quentin studied her face. Even so, everyone deserves moments of beauty. The simple statement, delivered in his matter-of-fact way, touched Sarah deeply. This thoughtful gesture revealed a side of Quentin she'd glimpsed, but never seen so clearly a man capable of romance, of appreciating beauty for its own sake rather than utility. They ate in companionable silence, the vista before them more nourishing than any conversation. When they'd finished, Quentin leaned back against the tree trunk, his usual reserve softened by the serenity of their surroundings. "My father proposed to my mother in this very spot," he said after a while, his voice quiet. "Brought her up here one autumn day much like this one, got down on one knee and offered her a simple gold band. No grand promises, just an honest pledge to work hard and love her well." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the personal revelation. She must have found it sufficient. "She did," Quentin confirmed. "Always said she never regretted choosing love and this wild country over the comfortable life she might have had back east. She was a schoolteacher, too, before she married. Taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Kansas until she met my father at a harvest dance." "Is that why you've been so supportive of my teaching?" Sarah asked, the pieces suddenly connecting. Quentin considered this. "Perhaps partly. But mostly because I've seen how it lights you up from within. You were made to share knowledge, Sarah. It would be wrong to deny you that purpose simply because circumstances brought you here as a housekeeper." The thoughtfulness of his perspective struck Sarah anew. How many men would see beyond the immediate utility of a woman's service to recognize her deeper calling? Yet Quentin had not only seen it, but had taken steps to help her fulfill it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me as I am, not merely as what I can provide." Quentin turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intent. "I've seen you from the first day, Sarah. A woman of remarkable strength and dignity, sleeping against a church wall rather than compromising her principles. Everything I've learned about you since has only deepened my admiration." The naked honesty in his voice sent a flush of warmth through Sarah. This was no casual compliment but a declaration of sorts, though Quentin seemed hesitant to name it more explicitly. "I've come to admire you as well," she admitted, her heart beating faster. "Your integrity, your quiet kindness, the way you care for this land and the people who depend on you." Something shifted in Quentin's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she'd never witnessed before. Slowly, as if giving her every chance to withdraw, he reached out to touch her cheek with calloused fingers that belied their gentleness. "Sarah," he said, her name a question and answer both. She leaned into his touch, permission granted without words. When his lips met hers, the kiss was tentative at first, a careful exploration that deepened as Sarah responded with a surety that surprised them both. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss continued, communicating what neither had fully articulated in words. When they finally parted, Quentin rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I didn't bring you here with this intention," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I hope you know that," Sarah smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I know. Just as I know that a man who planned merely to seduce wouldn't have chosen to share a place so meaningful to his family's history." Relief flickered in Quentin's eyes. "You understand me better than I sometimes understand myself." "Not always," Sarah countered gently, "but I'm learning." They remained in the meadow until the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, talking more openly than ever before about their hopes and fears, the growing feelings between them, and the complications their different positions at the ranch presented. "I don't want you to feel obligated in any way," Quentin emphasized as they prepared to return. "Your position at Willow Creek is secure regardless of this." He gestured between them, still searching for the right words to define what was developing. "I know," Sarah assured him. "Just as I hope you know that my feelings aren't motivated by gratitude or dependency." Quentin nodded, his expression solemn. "We should proceed carefully for both our sakes, give ourselves time to be certain." "Wise counsel," Sarah agreed, though part of her already felt a certainty that defied caution. "We have time." As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land, Sarah felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. Whatever came next, today had changed everything, had transformed Willow Creek from a refuge into a place where her future might truly take root. The weeks following their afternoon in the high meadow brought a subtle but significant shift in Sarah and Quentin's relationship. Nothing was announced or formalized, but small changes marked the evolution of their connection, lingering touches when passing items at the table, walks together in the evenings after supper, more frequent moments of shared laughter. They remained discreet, mindful of appearances and the potential for gossip among the ranch hands, but anyone observing closely might have noted the softening in Quentin's normally reserved demeanor, or the heightened color in Sarah's cheeks when their eyes met across a room. November arrived with biting winds and the first serious snowfall of the season. The ranch settled into its winter rhythm, fewer daylight hours for outdoor work, more time spent mending equipment, taking inventory, and planning for spring. Sarah's classes continued, though occasionally postponed when weather made travel dangerous for the children. On one such day, with snow falling steadily outside the windows, Sarah found herself in the kitchen preparing stew for supper when Quentin entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Bennett's boy just rode through," he announced, removing his coat. "Says the storm's worsening. I've sent word to the other families not to attempt bringing the children tomorrow." Sarah nodded, concern furrowing her brow. "Is John all right? He shouldn't have been out in this weather." "He's fine. I sent him back with Miguel, who'll see him safely home before returning." Quentin moved to the stove, warming his hands over the pot Sarah was stirring. "Smells good. Venison stew," Sarah replied. "I thought something hearty would be welcome with the temperature dropping." She hesitated, then added, "Will this storm delay the cattle sale in Denver?" Quentin had been planning to take a small herd to market the following week, a journey that would keep him away for at least 10 days. Sarah had been dreading the separation, their first significant time apart since their relationship had deepened. "Probably not," Quentin said, reaching for a coffee cup. "The pass should be clear by then if the weather follows its usual pattern. Miguel and I will leave as planned, assuming no complications." Sarah nodded, keeping her disappointment from her expression. The cattle sale was important business, representing a significant portion of the ranch's annual income. Her personal feelings couldn't interfere with such practical necessities. I've been meaning to speak with you about something, Quentin continued, leaning against the counter beside her. Something I'd like you to consider while I'm away. Sarah glanced at him, curiosity piqued by his serious tone. Oh, I've received a letter from my mother's sister in Boston, Aunt Rebecca. She's my only remaining family, and we correspond a few times a year. Quentin sipped his coffee before continuing. In her latest letter, she mentioned plans to visit Colorado in the spring. I've invited her to stay at the ranch. Of course, Sarah replied, wondering why this warranted such gravity. I'll ensure the guest room is properly prepared when the time comes. Quentin set down his cup, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. There's more to it than that. Aunt Rebecca is traditional in her views. She would find it inappropriate for an unmarried woman to be living under the same roof as a bachelor, regardless of the employment relationship. Understanding dawned slowly. I see, Sarah said carefully. You're concerned about how she might perceive my presence here. I'm concerned about how she might perceive us, Quentin corrected gently. Rebecca has sharp eyes and sharper intuition. She'll recognize what's developing between us immediately. Sarah stirred the stew, buying time to gather her thoughts. What solution do you propose? Quentin drew a deep breath. I thought perhaps by spring our situation might be more defined. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah's heart raced as she realized what Quentin was suggesting, not an immediate proposal, but the possibility of one before his aunt's arrival. Quentin, she began, uncertain how to respond to this oblique discussion of their future. I'm not asking for an answer now, he hastened to add. Only that you think about what you want, what would make you happy. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of emotional discomfort. I'm not skilled at expressing these matters, Sarah, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are serious, permanent. The simple declaration, delivered in Quentin's straightforward manner, affected Sarah more profoundly than any flowery speech might have done. She set aside her spoon and turned to face him fully. Mine for you as well, she said softly. I'll think about what you've said while you're away. And we'll talk when you return. Relief washed over Quentin's features. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. That's all I ask. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the back door opening as Miguel returned from escorting John Bennett home. Quentin released Sarah's hand, stepping back to a more proper distance as the foreman entered, bringing a gust of cold air and snowflakes with him. Storm's picking up, Miguel reported, removing his snow-covered hat. Might want to check the north pasture fence before dark, Jeef. Last big snow brought down some branches there. Quentin nodded, exchanging a meaningful glance with Sarah before following Miguel back out into the gathering storm. Left alone, Sarah leaned against the counter, her mind whirling with the implications of their conversation. Quentin hadn't proposed marriage outright, but he'd made his intentions clear. The prospect filled her with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Marriage would change everything: her status, her responsibilities, her relationship to the ranch itself. No longer an employee but a partner with all the complexities that entailed. Did she want that? The answer came with surprising clarity: yes. In the month since Quentin had lifted her from the church steps, she'd found not just security but purpose at Willow Creek Ranch. She'd grown to love the land almost as much as the man who stewarded it. The thought of building a future here, of perhaps raising children in this place of beauty and honest work, filled her with a sense of rightness she couldn't deny. When Quentin departed for Denver the following week, their farewell was charged with unspoken emotion. He kissed her privately in the study before joining the men waiting with the cattle herd. 10 days, he promised. 12 at the most, Sarah nodded, committing his face to memory. Be safe. Always, he replied, his hand lingering on her cheek before he reluctantly stepped away. I'll be thinking of you every mile. The days of Quentin's absence stretched interminably for Sarah. She filled them with routine tasks: cooking, cleaning, teaching when weather permitted the children to attend, but the house felt emptier without his presence. In the evenings, she often sat in his study, drawing comfort from the space where his personality was most strongly imprinted. On the 10th day, a fresh snowstorm descended on Willow Creek Ranch, bringing with it a sense of foreboding that Sarah couldn't shake. Quentin should have been home by now, or at least close enough to have sent word of his progress. When Miguel voiced similar concerns over breakfast, Sarah's anxiety increased. The pass can be treacherous after heavy snow, the foreman explained, his weathered face grave. And there have been reports of bandits targeting ranchers returning from the Denver markets. Surely Quentin is too experienced to be caught unawares, Sarah said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Miguel nodded. See, the boss is careful, but sometimes trouble finds even the most cautious man. By the 12th day, with no word and another storm threatening, Miguel decided to organize a search party. We'll ride to meet them, he told Sarah as she packed provisions for the journey. Probably nothing to worry about, just delayed by weather or a lame horse, but better to be sure. Sarah nodded, fighting the urge to ask to accompany them. She knew she would only slow their progress, yet the thought of remaining behind to wait was almost unbearable. Bring him home, she said simply as Miguel and 2 other ranch hands prepared to depart. Count on it, Miguel promised, his kind eyes reflecting understanding of the depth of her concern. 2 more days passed in anxious vigilance. Sarah moved through her duties mechanically, ears straining for the sound of approaching riders. She prayed, she paced, she stood at the window watching the road until her eyes burned from the glare of sun on snow. On the afternoon of the 14th day, Sarah was in the kitchen kneading bread dough with more force than necessary when Alina burst through the door. They're coming. The older woman exclaimed. I saw them from the rise, 4 riders and the wagon. Sarah's hands stilled, her heart leaping. Quentin, Alina nodded, her smile confirming what Sarah most needed to know. See, he is with them. Go, wash your hands, I will finish this. Sarah needed no further encouragement. She quickly cleaned the flour from her hands and hurried outside, not bothering with a coat despite the bitter cold. She stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the winter sun as she watched the small procession approach. Miguel rode in front, followed by the 2 ranch hands. Behind them came the wagon with Quentin at the reins, moving slowly over the rutted, snow-covered road. As they drew closer, Sarah could see that Quentin's right arm was bound in a makeshift sling, and her heart constricted with renewed worry. She hurried down the steps as the group reached the yard, restraining herself from running directly to Quentin only through supreme effort of will. Miguel dismounted first, coming to greet her with reassurance in his expression. Found them about 30 miles east, he reported. The boss took a bullet, but it's not serious, went clean through the shoulder. Doc Jenkins patched him up in town before we started back. Bandits? Sarah asked, her gaze fixed on Quentin as he carefully descended from the wagon. Miguel nodded grimly. 3 of them. Tried to take the money from the cattle sale. They didn't count on the boss being quicker on the draw, even outnumbered. Sarah barely registered the explanation as she moved toward Quentin, propriety forgotten in her relief at seeing him alive. He looked tired and pale beneath his tan, his normally immaculate clothing rumpled and stained with what she recognized with a chill as dried blood. But his eyes brightened at the sight of her, and he managed a smile that eased some of her fear. You're hurt, she said, stopping just short of embracing him in front of the men. Not badly, Quentin assured her, his good hand reaching for hers briefly. Looks worse than it is, sorry to worry you. Let's get you inside, Sarah said, practicality asserting itself. You need rest and proper care. With Miguel's help, they got Quentin settled in his bedroom, where Sarah could examine his wound away from prying eyes. The doctor had done a competent job of cleaning and stitching the injury, but the journey had clearly taken a toll. Quentin's forehead was warm to the touch, suggesting the beginning of a fever. You should have stayed in town until you were stronger, Sarah chided gently as she changed the bandage. Quentin winced as she cleaned around the wound. Couldn't, needed to get back. The ranch would have managed a few more days without you. Wasn't worried about the ranch, Quentin said, his eyes holding hers. Needed to see you to tell you I'd made a decision. Sarah's hands stilled. A decision, Quentin nodded, grimacing slightly as he shifted position. When those bandits opened fire, all I could think about was you, not the money, not the ranch, just you, and all the things I hadn't said yet." He caught her hand in his. "Life's too uncertain to waste time being cautious, Sarah. I love you. I want to marry you if you'll have me." The directness of the proposal, so like Quentin in its lack of pretense, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. This was no carefully planned romantic gesture, but an honest declaration born of genuine feeling and the stark recognition of life's fragility. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief and joy transformed Quentin's tired features. He tugged her hand, drawing her down for a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't capture. When they parted, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "Planned to get one in Denver, but things went sideways." Sarah smiled, remembering the ring hidden in her dress hem, the one possession she'd managed to keep through all her hardships. "I might have a solution for that," she said, "but it can wait. For now, you need to rest and recover." Quentin nodded, already fighting to keep his eyes open as exhaustion overtook him. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Always," Sarah promised, settling into the chair beside his bed. As Quentin drifted into sleep, his hand still clasping hers, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperate hunger beside a church wall to the promise of a future filled with purpose and love. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and surrounding properties. Alina was the first to offer congratulations, embracing Sarah with tears of joy and assuring her that she'd always known this day would come. Miguel solemnly shook Quentin's hand when he was well enough to come downstairs. Declaring that it was about time, his boss showed sense in personal matters as well as business. The children in Sarah's class were full of questions and excitement, with young Mary Bennett already volunteering to be a flower girl and Ruth Crawford earnestly inquiring whether Sarah would continue teaching after she became Mrs. Irwin. "Of course," Sarah assured them, touched by their concern. "Being a wife doesn't mean I'll stop being your teacher." The couple decided on a spring wedding when the worst of winter had passed and travel would be easier for guests. Quentin's Aunt Rebecca adjusted her visit plans to coincide with the ceremony, writing a warm letter expressing her delight at finally meeting the woman who had captured her nephew's heart. As Quentin recovered from his injury, he and Sarah spent evenings planning their future together. They would expand the main house to include a proper schoolroom, allowing Sarah to continue teaching while taking on the role of ranch mistress. Quentin suggested converting part of the unused formal parlor into a library, knowing how Sarah treasured books and learning. "I want this to be our home, not just mine that you're joining," he explained as they sat before the fire one snowy evening. "A place that reflects both of us." Sarah leaned against his good shoulder, contentment washing through her. "It already feels like home," she admitted. "Has for some time now." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Even so, I want you to make whatever changes would bring you joy. This partnership should benefit us both." The word partnership resonated with Sarah. It captured what she'd come to value most about their relationship, the sense that Quentin saw her as an equal, respecting her mind and abilities as much as he cherished her heart. Winter gradually released its grip on the land, and with the first hints of spring came preparations for the wedding. Sarah, with Alina's help, sewed her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. The ceremony would take place at the small church in town, followed by a celebration at the ranch for neighbors and friends. 2 weeks before the wedding, Quentin surprised Sarah with an unexpected request. "Would you ride with me tomorrow afternoon?" he asked as they finished supper. "There's something I'd like to show you." Sarah agreed readily, curious about what Quentin might have planned. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect for riding. They set out after lunch, following a familiar route toward the high meadow where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other. When they reached the spot, Sarah was surprised to see changes. A small clearing had been cut among the trees at the meadow's edge, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a stone foundation laid out in a rectangular pattern. "What is this?" she asked as they dismounted. Quentin took her hand, leading her toward the site. "A wedding gift," he explained. "Or the start of one. I thought we might build a small cabin here, nothing elaborate, just a place to escape occasionally when the main house feels too busy. Somewhere quiet where we could spend time alone, especially in summer when the ranch work is most demanding." Sarah walked the perimeter of the foundation, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. A private retreat in this place that already held such meaning for them both, it was perfect. "Miguel's nephew is a skilled stonemason," Quentin continued when she remained silent. "He's agreed to help with the construction once the weather settles. We could have it finished by midsummer." Sarah turned to him, emotion tightening her throat. "It's wonderful," she managed. "Truly the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Relief and pleasure lit Quentin's face. "You approve, then?" "More than approve," Sarah assured him, stepping into his embrace. "I love it, and I love you." Quentin's arms tightened around her. "I want to give you everything, Sarah. A home, a family, a future without hunger or fear." Sarah leaned back to look into his eyes. "You already have," she said softly, "from the moment you lifted me from that church wall and said no more." The day of the wedding arrived with perfect spring weather, clear skies, gentle breezes, and wildflowers dotting the newly green landscape. The small church in town was filled to capacity with ranchers, townspeople, and the children Sarah had taught through the winter months. Quentin's Aunt Rebecca, a dignified woman in her 60s with the same striking blue eyes as her nephew, sat in the front pew, her expression one of approval and quiet joy. Sarah waited in a small anteroom, her heart racing with anticipation rather than nervousness. Elena helped adjust her veil, then stepped back to admire the effect. "You are beautiful, Querida," the older woman said, her eyes misty, "like a spring flower after the long winter." Sarah embraced her friend, grateful for her steady presence. "Thank you for everything, Elena. Your friendship has meant more than I can express." A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Franklin Tucker, who had offered to escort Sarah down the aisle in the absence of her father. The rancher, resplendent in his Sunday best, beamed at the sight of her. "Well now," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "if you aren't the prettiest bride this territory has seen in a long while. Quentin's a fortunate man." "I believe we're both fortunate," Sarah replied, accepting his arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Sarah. She would later remember fragments with perfect clarity, the look in Quentin's eyes when she appeared at the church doors, the warmth of his hands as they exchanged rings, the minister's words about building a life on foundations of love and respect. The ring she placed on Quentin's finger was new, purchased in Denver, but the one he slipped onto her hand was her mother's wedding band, retrieved from its hiding place in her dress hem and given new meaning in this moment of promise. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Sarah felt a sense of homecoming as Quentin's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple. The celebration at Willow Creek Ranch continued well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Elena and other neighboring women. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the festivities as dusk settled. There was music, fiddles, and a guitar played by talented ranch hands, and dancing that continued until the stars emerged in full brilliance overhead. As the night deepened, Sarah found herself standing slightly apart from the celebration, watching Quentin as he spoke with Miguel near the barn. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. A smile passed between them, private, intimate, full of promise for the night ahead and all the days to follow. Quentin excused himself and crossed to her side, taking her hand in his. "Happy?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Completely." They stood together, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate around them, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate circumstances had grown a love neither had expected to find, a love born of kindness, nurtured by respect, and now sealed with vows that would bind them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "Shall we say our good nights?" Quentin suggested, his voice low near her ear. "I believe my wife and I have private matters to discuss." The word wife sent a thrill through Sarah. "I believe we do," she agreed, her cheeks warming at the implication. They made their rounds, thanking guests for sharing their special day, before slipping away to the main house where their new life together awaited. As they crossed the threshold, Quentin swept Sarah into his arms, carrying her up the stairs to what was now their shared bedroom. "No more sleeping alone," he murmured as he set her gently on her feet. "No more hunger of any kind." Sarah reached up to touch his beloved face, her heart full beyond measure. "No more," she echoed, the words that had once promised mere survival now symbolizing the abundance of love and security they'd found in each other. Outside, the celebration continued under the star-filled sky, but within the walls of their home, Sarah and Quentin began writing the most intimate chapter of their story, one that had begun with an act of compassion beside a church wall, and would continue through all the seasons of their lives together at Willow Creek Ranch. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun cast dappled shadows through the cottonwood leaves as Sarah sat on the porch of the high meadow cabin, watching her 3-year-old daughter, Rebecca, chase butterflies in the wildflower-strewn grass. The child's laughter rang clear in the mountain air, her copper curls bouncing with each excited step. "Careful near the edge, Becca," Sarah called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew steadily stronger each day. "She's fine," Quentin said, emerging from the cabin with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah before settling beside her on the bench they'd built together the previous summer. "Has her mother's good sense?" Sarah smiled, accepting both the coffee and the compliment. "And her father's fearlessness," she added, watching as their daughter fearlessly scrambled over a fallen log. 5 years of marriage had deepened their love in ways Sarah hadn't imagined possible. There had been challenges, of course a drought that threatened the ranch's survival, the difficult birth of their first child, Quentin's brief illness that had frightened Sarah more than she cared to remember. But they had faced each obstacle together, emerging stronger for the trials they'd weathered. Willow Creek Ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. The house had been expanded to include not only the library they'd planned, but also a proper schoolroom where Sarah now taught 12 children from surrounding properties 3 days each week. Quentin had increased the herd and added sheep to diversify their income. Miguel and Alina remained, now more family than employees, with Miguel training his nephew to eventually take over as foreman when he retired. The cabin in the high meadow had become their special retreat, a place to escape the demands of ranch life occasionally and reconnect with each other. They tried to spend at least 1 weekend each month here, sometimes alone, sometimes with little Rebecca, who loved the meadow's wildflowers and the small stream where Quentin was teaching her to fish. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, his hand covering hers on the bench between them. Sarah turned to study his face, more weathered now than when they'd met, with creases at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun and the first threads of silver at his temples. Yet his blue eyes remained as clear and direct as ever, still regarding her with the same mixture of love and admiration that never failed to warm her heart. "I was thinking about the day we met," she admitted. "How desperate I was, how little hope I had left." Quentin's expression softened with memory. "You were the strongest woman I'd ever seen, even at your lowest point. Dignity like that can't be taught." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, remembering the hunger and fear that had once been her constant companions. "I never imagined then that life could hold such happiness." "Nor I," Quentin agreed, his arms sliding around her waist. "I was content enough before, but I didn't understand real joy until you became part of my life." Rebecca came running toward them then, a fistful of wildflowers clutched in her small hand. "For the baby," she announced, placing them carefully on Sarah's rounded belly. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart," Sarah said, drawing her daughter close for a hug. "I'm sure your little brother or sister appreciates the gift." "Brother," Rebecca stated with the certainty only a child could muster. "I asked for a brother," Quentin chuckled, lifting the girl onto his lap. "Well, we'll find out soon enough, won't we? Another month or so, your mama says." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting the meadow in golden light, the small family gathered their belongings to return to the main house before dark. Quentin helped Sarah onto her horse, riding still being safer than the jolting wagon at this stage of her pregnancy, then lifted Rebecca to sit before him on his own mount. As they descended the trail toward home, Sarah glanced back at the cabin silhouetted against the evening sky. From desperation to abundance, from hunger to fulfillment, the journey still amazed her. The words Quentin had spoken on that fateful day outside the church had proven prophetic in ways neither could have foreseen. No more hunger, no more loneliness, no more fear. Instead, they had built a life rich with purpose, love, and the quiet joy that comes from facing each day beside the person who completes your heart. As Willow Creek Ranch came into view, its windows glowing with welcome light, Sarah offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man who had lifted her from despair and carried her into a future brighter than any she could have imagined.